An Arab millionaire executive discovers his long-lost daughter working as a waitress through a necklace. And what happens next will leave you in tears. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more emotional and inspiring stories like this one. Karim Al-Fayed had everything: power, wealth, and influence. But nothing could fill the void left by the daughter he lost years ago. One night, while dining in an upscale restaurant, his world stops when he notices something shocking. A young waitress wearing a necklace that once belonged to his baby girl. Was it possible? Could fate have reunited them after all these years? Stay with us as we unravel a story of loss, fate, and a discovery that will change everything. The evening air was thick with the scent of saffron and grilled lamb as Karim Al-Fayed stepped into La Mirage, one of Dubai's most exclusive restaurants. The place was buzzing with the chatter of the city's elite, and as always, he was met with the kind of hushed reverence reserved for men of his stature. Yet tonight, Karim was not in the mood to enjoy the luxuries around him. He was here on business, closing yet another multi-million-dollar deal, another victory, another success, and yet emptiness. For over 20 years, that feeling had followed him like a shadow. His daughter, gone, stolen from him in a moment of chaos. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her tiny fingers clutching his, the soft giggles that once filled his home, now only an echo in his mind. He had spent a fortune searching for her, following dead-end leads and empty promises. The trail had gone cold. Tonight was no different. Until he saw her. Or rather, he saw the necklace. Karim's breath caught in his throat. A young woman, dressed in a simple black uniform, was weaving between tables, balancing trays with effortless grace. But it wasn't her face that paralyzed him. It was the delicate gold pendant resting against her collarbone. A crescent moon intertwined with a star. It was impossible. That necklace had been custom-made for his daughter Layla, a one-of-a-kind design crafted when she was just a baby, a symbol of protection, a promise that she would always be safe. And yet, here it was, on the neck of a waitress, in a place she did not belong. The room around him faded. The business deal, the noise, the expensive wine swirling in his untouched glass, none of it mattered. His heart pounded as he watched her move, his mind racing. Could it be her? He needed to know. Summoning a waiter with a flick of his wrist, his voice came out calm, but his hands trembled. "Bring me that waitress." The waiter hesitated. "Sir, she's new. I said bring me that waitress." Moments later, the girl approached, her expression hesitant. Up close, she was even more striking. Olive skin, deep brown eyes, and a presence that tugged at something buried deep within him. But when she finally spoke, Karim felt his world shift beneath him. "Good evening, sir. My name is Lena. How can I help you?" And just like that, his past and present collided. Because Layla was the name of the daughter he lost, and Lena was standing right in front of him. Karim Al-Fayed had built his empire on one rule: never show weakness. In boardrooms, at negotiations, and even in the cutthroat world of international business, he was a man of steel. But as he sat in La Mirage, staring at the young waitress standing before him, his hands clenched beneath the table to keep them from shaking. Lena. The name alone sent a jolt through his chest. The way she held herself, the curve of her features, the depth in her eyes. Everything about her reminded him of Layla. But it wasn't possible. It couldn't be. She was gone, And yet, that necklace. Kareem swallowed hard, his throat dry as he gestured toward it. That pendant. Where did you get it? His voice was low, measured, but he could feel the weight of his own heartbeat hammering in his ribs. Lena instinctively touched the necklace, fingers grazing the golden crescent moon. She hesitated. "It was my mother's," she finally said, shifting on her feet. "She gave it to me before she passed away." His stomach twisted. "Your mother," he pressed. She nodded. "She always told me it was special, something that was meant to protect me." A small, sad smile flickered across her lips. "But I don't really know where it came from. She never spoke much about the past." Kareem's mind was spinning. Could it be true? Could this girl really be his daughter? He had spent years chasing leads, tracking down whispers of Layla's possible whereabouts, only to end up with dead ends. He had been told she was lost, that she had likely died. But this girl was standing right in front of him, wearing the one thing that could tie her to him. His chest tightened. There was only one way to be sure. "Where are you from?" he asked, watching her reaction closely. Lena frowned. I don't know exactly. My mother and I moved a lot when I was younger. She never wanted to stay in one place too long." A pang of something dangerous and familiar shot through him. That made sense. If someone had taken Layla, if she had been hidden from him all these years, moving constantly would have kept him off their trail. Kareem leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Your mother, what was her name?" Lena hesitated again. It was a simple question, too simple. And yet something about the way Kareem asked it made her pulse quicken. She took a breath. "Her name was Amira." Kareem felt the air leave his lungs. Amira. The woman who had been his wife. The woman who had vanished with their child 20 years ago. His vision blurred. This is impossible. But deep inside, he already knew he had just found his daughter. Kareem's grip on the table tightened. Amira. The name alone sent a storm through his mind, a hurricane of memories he had buried long ago. The woman he had loved, the woman who had vanished into thin air with their newborn daughter. And now, standing right in front of him, was a young woman claiming to be Amira's daughter, wearing the very necklace he had designed for Layla. His Layla. Lena's expression shifted under his unwavering stare. She glanced around nervously, as if realizing the intensity of the conversation. "Sir, are you okay?" No, he was not okay. But he couldn't let his emotions take over. Not here, not now. He forced himself to relax, leaning back into his chair with a controlled breath. "Forgive me," he said, voice smooth but measured. "I used to know someone named Amira. Hearing that name again was unexpected." Lena's eyes softened slightly. "She was an amazing woman," she said. "Strong, kind, but also secretive." A small bittersweet laugh escaped her lips. "She never told me much about her past. I used to ask about my father, but," she shrugged, "she always changed the subject." Kareem's stomach twisted. Why? Why had Amira erased him from their daughter's life? His mind raced with questions, but before he could press further, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Lena, get back to work." A man's voice. Kareem's eyes snapped toward the source, a middle-aged restaurant manager in an ill-fitting suit scowling from the bar. Lena flinched at the sound of his voice, then turned back to Kareem with an apologetic look. I'm sorry, sir. I should... Quit, Lena blinked. What? Kareem leaned forward, voice low and commanding. Walk out right now. I will make sure you never have to serve another table in your life. Lena let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. That's generous, but I need this job. She doesn't know. She had no idea who he was. No idea that the man sitting in front of her could change her life in an instant. But Kareem did, and there was no way he would let his daughter walk away again. His mind was already calculating. He needed proof, a DNA test. He needed to confirm what his heart was already screaming. But first, he needed to get her out of here. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a sleek black card, and slid it across the table. Take this. If you ever need help, call me. Lena hesitated, staring at the card. Kareem Al-Fayed? Her brows furrowed as she read the name. Wait, I've heard this name before. His heart pounded. You're... Lena! The manager's voice barked again. She exhaled sharply and picked up the card, shoving it into her apron pocket. I have to go, she murmured. Then, before Kareem could stop her, she turned and disappeared into the crowded restaurant. He sat there, frozen. She was gone. Again. But not this time. This time, Kareem wouldn't stop until he knew the truth. Kareem Al-Fayed wasn't a man who waited. He wasn't a man who let things slip through his fingers. And yet, tonight, he had let her walk away. His hands curled into fists on the pristine white tablecloth. He had spent 20 years searching for his daughter, chasing false leads, hiring the best investigators in the world. And now that she was standing right in front of him, he had let her disappear into the crowd of a restaurant. Unacceptable. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to remain composed. He could not afford to let emotions cloud his judgment. Not now. Not when he was this close. Reaching for his phone, he dialed a number without hesitation. The line barely rang before a voice answered. Mr. Al-Fayed, find everything you can on a woman named Lena, waitress at La Mirage. I need a full background check within the hour. Address, family records, employment history, everything. A pause, then the obedient voice replied, Understood, sir. Kareem ended the call and stood, adjusting the cuffs of his custom-tailored suit. He had learned long ago that patience was for men who didn't know how to take what was theirs. And if Lena was really his daughter, then she was his. Lena shoved the black business card deeper into her apron pocket as she rinsed out an empty wine glass, her hands trembling. Kareem Al-Fayed. The name had sent a shock through her system the moment she read it. She had heard it before. Somewhere. Her mother, Amira, had spoken the name once. She couldn't remember when, but it was burned into the back of her mind, like a whisper she had been too young to understand. She shook her head, trying to push away the unease creeping through her. It had been a long shift, and the last thing she needed was to get lost in thoughts that didn't make sense. Who was this man? And why had he looked at her like she was something he had lost? The clatter of plates in the kitchen snapped her back to reality. She exhaled sharply, running a hand over her forehead. Get it together, Lena. Before she could dwell on it further, a firm hand grabbed her wrist. She gasped, spinning around. The manager. You think I didn't see that? He hissed under his breath. His fingers dug into her arm, eyes narrowing with suspicion. That was Kareem Al-Fayed. Why the hell is a man like that interested in a nobody like you? Lena wrenched her arm free. I don't know. But that was a lie. Something inside her did know. She just didn't understand it yet. The manager exhaled sharply. Whatever this is, drop it. Men like him don't just show up for no reason. And if you know what's good for you, you'll stay away." He turned and stalked off, leaving Lena standing there, heart pounding. She felt the weight of the necklace against her chest, its cool metal pressing against her skin. "What aren't you telling me, Mom?" Her fingers brushed over the pendant, and for the first time, a terrifying thought crept into her mind. What if everything she thought she knew about her life was a lie? Kareem stepped outside, the cool night air failing to temper the heat rising in his chest. His driver was already waiting, the sleek black Rolls-Royce gleaming under the city lights. He slid into the back seat, eyes dark with determination. "Back to the penthouse," he ordered, loosening the collar of his shirt as he leaned back into the leather seat. As the car glided through the streets of Dubai, his mind raced. Lena had been raised by Amira. That much was clear. But why had Amira never contacted him? Why had she hidden their daughter from him for 2 decades? The questions burned through him, each one fueling his resolve. His phone vibrated. He grabbed it instantly. "Sir, we have a preliminary report on the girl." Kareem's grip tightened around the device. "Go on." "Lena Amari, 20 years old. No father listed on any official records. Raised by her mother, Amira Amari, who passed away 2 years ago. They moved frequently. No stable address until Amira's death." His jaw clenched. Of course, she had moved frequently. Amira had been running. From him. The voice on the phone hesitated. "There's one more thing, sir." Kareem's pulse pounded. "What?" "Her mother didn't die of natural causes." Silence stretched between them. "What are you saying?" Kareem asked, voice deathly quiet. A pause. Then, "Sir, Amira Amari was murdered." Kareem's breath stalled. Murdered. The word sliced through him like a blade. Who had killed her? And why? And more importantly, had they known about Lena? For the first time in years, a cold fear settled deep into his bones. If someone had taken Amira's life, then there was a chance that Lena was in danger too. And if she was, then Kareem was going to tear the world apart to protect her. The city lights of Dubai blurred past the tinted windows of Kareem's Rolls-Royce, but his mind was locked in place, frozen on the last words his investigator had just spoken. Amira Amari was murdered. Murdered. The weight of the revelation pressed into his chest, making it hard to breathe. For 2 decades, he had believed Amira had taken their daughter and disappeared by choice, that she had run from him. But now, an even darker thought twisted in his mind. What if she hadn't run? What if she had been hiding? And if someone had killed Amira, was Lena their next target? His grip tightened around the phone. Who did this? The voice on the other end hesitated. The case went cold, sir. No suspects, no leads. It happened in Casablanca, in a run-down apartment complex. A break-in, supposedly. But nothing was stolen. Nothing stolen. A hit. Kareem clenched his jaw, his mind assembling the pieces. Amira had been running, changing locations. No stable address. It hadn't been by choice. She had been hiding from someone. And in the end, they had found her. And now Lena was alone, working in a restaurant where anyone could walk in, where anyone could find her. His chest burned with fury. He had spent years believing his daughter was dead, only to discover she had been alive this entire time, and now she could be in danger. Not again. Never again. His voice came out like steel. Find out everything about Amira's final years. Every address, every name she was connected to. Find out who could have wanted her dead. Yes, sir. He ended the call, his jaw tight. The car slowed as they pulled into the underground parking of his penthouse tower. The driver exited first, opening Kareem's door, but he barely noticed. His mind was already set on one thing. He had to get to Lena. He stormed toward the private elevator, his mind replaying every moment from the restaurant. The hesitation in her voice, the way she had instinctively clutched the necklace. The name Amira sitting on her tongue, like a memory she had never fully understood. She didn't know. She had no idea who he was. She had no idea who she was. And if he had learned anything in his years of building empires, it was that ignorance was the most dangerous thing of all. Because if Lena didn't know the truth, she wouldn't see the danger coming. And that meant he had to move fast. Meanwhile, Lena sat on the edge of her small apartment bed, staring down at the black business card in her hands. Kareem Al-Fayed. She had looked up his name the moment she got home, and what she found made her stomach drop. He wasn't just rich. He was one of the richest men in the world. His face was in Forbes. His name was in headlines. A billionaire, a tycoon, a man so far removed from her reality that she couldn't begin to understand why he had looked at her like she was the most important thing in the world. And then there was the necklace. She ran her fingers over the pendant, a nervous habit she had since childhood. She had never taken it off. Not once. Not even when times got tough. When she and her mother had to sleep in shelters. When they had to leave everything behind and start over. Again and again. It had been the one constant in her life. The one thing her mother had told her to always keep close. Why? She had asked before, but her mother had only ever smiled sadly. Because it belongs to someone who loves you very much. A pang of grief hit her chest. If only she had asked more questions. If only she had pushed harder. But now her mother was gone, and the only person who seemed to know something about her past was a billionaire who had walked into her restaurant like a storm waiting to break. Her fingers curled around the necklace. She needed answers, and she knew exactly where to get them. She grabbed the business card and her phone, her heart pounding as she dialed the number. It rang once, twice. Then, a deep voice, smooth, controlled, expecting her. "I was hoping you'd call." She swallowed. She hesitated, suddenly unsure what to say. "I need to talk to you." A pause. Then, "Where are you?" She hesitated again. My place." "No." His voice was firm. "Not safe. Send me the address. I'll send a car." A shiver ran through her. Not safe. What was she getting herself into? But deep down, she already knew. This wasn't just about a necklace. This was about who she really was, and she was about to find out the truth. Lena's hands trembled as she typed out her address and hit send. There was no turning back now. The moment the message was delivered, she felt a weight settle deep in her chest. What was she doing? Kareem Al-Fayed was a billionaire, a man with power beyond anything she could imagine, and yet something inside her told her that he wasn't just some stranger who had taken an interest in her. He knew something, and she needed to find out what. Her phone vibrated. "Kareem, my driver will be there in 10 minutes. Do not open the door for anyone else." Lena's stomach twisted. Why did that message feel like a warning? She stood from her bed, pacing the small confines of her apartment. The neighborhood was nothing special. Just a modest part of the city, where the buildings were a little older, the paint on the walls a little chipped. It was home, or at least the closest thing she had to one. She glanced at the door. Her mother had always been overly cautious, locking the door the second they stepped inside, keeping the curtains drawn at night, flinching every time the phone rang unexpectedly. Lena had thought it was just anxiety, that Amira was paranoid from years of struggling to survive. But now she wasn't so sure. A knock on the door made her jump. Her pulse pounded. That was too fast. Kareem's driver wouldn't be here yet. A second knock, louder this time. Her phone vibrated again. Kareem. "Do not open the door." Fear coiled in her stomach. Whoever was standing outside wasn't here by accident. She stayed frozen, holding her breath as the knocking turned into banging. "Lena!" a muffled voice called through the door. "I know you're in there. Open up!" She swallowed hard, inching toward the peephole. Her hands were sweating as she lifted onto her toes, peeking through. Her stomach dropped. Her manager, the same man who had warned her about Kareem earlier that night. She hesitated, but something told her not to move. A moment later, he cursed under his breath and stepped back, looking around the hallway before pulling out his phone. Lena watched as he paced, speaking into the device with urgency. Who was he calling? Her phone buzzed again. Kareem. "Get away from the door. My men are almost there." She didn't hesitate this time. She stepped back, far away from the entrance. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the knocking stopped. Lena's heart pounded against her ribs as she heard hurried footsteps retreating down the hallway. She let out a shaky breath, pressing a hand to her chest. A second later, headlights beamed through her window. A sleek black car. She rushed to grab her jacket, shoving her phone into her pocket before locking the door behind her. She sprinted down the stairs, her breath uneven, adrenaline making her limbs shake. The back door of the car opened before she even reached it. And there he was, Kareem. He looked even more intimidating up close, his sharp features barely illuminated by the glow of the streetlights. But his eyes weren't cold. They were intense, focused, and filled with something that looked almost like relief. "Get in," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. Lena hesitated only a second before she slid into the seat, the door clicking shut behind her. The car pulled away, leaving her world behind. Silence stretched between them as the city lights blurred past. She could feel the heat of his presence beside her, could sense the weight of his stare, even as she kept her eyes forward. She had spent her whole life wondering about the father she never knew. And now she was sitting next to a man who held the answers. "I need to know the truth," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Kareem exhaled slowly. "And you will." His gaze lingered on her necklace. "But first, I need to ask you something." Lena turned to face him, her heart hammering. His voice was lower now, almost hesitant. "Have you ever felt like someone was watching you?" A shiver ran down her spine, because the answer was yes. She just never knew why. Lena's breath hitched. The car was silent, the hum of the engine barely audible against the weight of Kareem's question. "Have you ever felt like someone was watching you?" The answer sat heavy on her tongue, and for the first time in her life, she felt like saying it out loud would make it real. Because the truth was, yes, there had been moments when she felt it. The prickle at the back of her neck, the eerie sense that she wasn't alone. Her mother had always brushed it off, telling her it was just her imagination. But now she wasn't so sure. Lena swallowed hard. Yes, she admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. Kareem's jaw tightened. His hands rested on his lap, fingers curled slightly like he was holding himself back from something. When? She exhaled, forcing herself to think. Mostly when I was younger. My mom and I moved a lot. But sometimes I'd get this weird feeling, like we weren't the only ones leaving. She paused, staring out the window. Like something was following us. Kareem's fingers tapped against the leather seat. His mind was working, connecting dots she didn't even know existed. Lena turned to him. Who would be watching me? His gaze darkened, and for the first time, she saw something in his expression that unsettled her. Fear. Someone who wanted you hidden, he said. Or someone who wanted you dead. A chill shot down her spine. Dead? He exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. Your mother didn't just disappear, Lena. She was running. And now I know why. She felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. Kareem wasn't just guessing. He knew something that changed everything. Her hands balled into fists. Tell me. He studied her for a moment, like he was weighing whether she was ready for the truth. Then, finally, he spoke. Amira was murdered. The world tilted. Lena's ears rang. What? Kareem's voice was calm, but his eyes burned. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was a targeted hit. Lena shook her head. No, that can't be. But suddenly, memories started piecing themselves together. Her mother's paranoia, the constant moves, the refusal to let Lena have a normal life, to stay in one place, to make friends. She had always told herself it was because of money problems, that her mother just struggled, just didn't want to be tied down. But what if that was a lie? What if everything was a lie? Her stomach twisted painfully. But why? She whispered. Kareem's gaze was unreadable. Because of me. Lena's breath caught. He looked away for a moment, his fingers tightening into fists before he forced them to relax. I spent years looking for you, but someone else was looking for you too. And when they found Amira first, they silenced her. Lena's pulse pounded in her ears. Who? His eyes met hers, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something beyond control, beyond power. Rage. Someone who didn't want me to know you were alive. Her whole body went cold. The car slowed, pulling into an underground parking garage. Kareem barely waited for the driver to open his door before stepping out. Lena hesitated. She had a choice to make. She could step out of this car and follow this man into a world she didn't understand. A world filled with money, power, and secrets bigger than she ever could have imagined. Or she could turn back, go back to her tiny apartment, go back to her life, pretending this never happened. But deep down, she already knew. She wasn't going back. She stepped out of the car. The moment her feet touched the ground, Kareem turned to her. I need you to trust me, he said. Lena took a breath and nodded. She didn't know where this road would lead, but she was ready to find out. Lena followed Kareem through the private entrance of the towering skyscraper, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. The moment she stepped inside, the air changed. This wasn't just wealth. This was power. The lobby was vast, its marble floors gleaming under soft golden lights, no front desk, no security standing in the open. But she could feel them, watching, silent, invisible, but always there. She shouldn't be here, and yet she couldn't turn back. Karim walked with purpose, his long strides forcing her to keep up. He led her into a private elevator, the doors sliding shut behind them with a quiet hum. Lena swallowed, hugging herself. "Where are we going?" Karim barely looked at her. "Somewhere safe." Her skin prickled. "Safe? From what?" He exhaled, pressing his fingers to his temple for a brief second. Then his gaze locked onto hers. "From the same people who killed your mother." Lena's stomach dropped. The elevator doors opened, revealing the penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the room, displaying the glowing skyline of Dubai. The space was immaculate. Glass, leather, and dark wood. A view fit for a king. But Lena barely noticed any of it. She turned to Karim, her hands trembling. "I need answers. No more riddles. No more vague warnings. Tell me who is after me." Karim sighed, walking toward a sleek bar at the far end of the room. He poured himself a drink, whiskey, dark and heavy, before turning back to face her. "I had enemies, Lena. Powerful men. Men who saw me as a threat, who wanted to bring me down. When your mother disappeared with you, I assumed she was running from me. But now I realize she was running for you." Lena's head spun. "What does that mean?" Karim took a slow sip before setting the glass down. His expression hardened. "It means she knew something I didn't. That someone was watching. That if they knew you were alive, they would come for you." A chill ran down her spine. She thought back to the knocks on her apartment door, the way her manager had grabbed her wrist at the restaurant, the uneasy feeling that had followed her for years. "What do they want from me?" she whispered. Karim's jaw tightened. "Not what. Who?" She stared at him, confused. His voice dropped lower. "They want to use you to control me." The word struck her like a blow. Use her? As leverage? Karim turned, walking toward a cabinet. He unlocked it with a fingerprint scan, retrieving a folder filled with papers. He handed it to her. Inside were photos. Of her. Walking home. Working at the restaurant. Sitting alone in her apartment. Lena's blood turned ice cold. Her voice shook. "They've been watching me?" "For years." Her knees nearly gave out. Her whole life, she had felt like something was wrong, like shadows lingered just out of reach. She thought it was paranoia. But it was real. And it had been real all along. Karim stepped closer, his voice low and firm. "That's why you can't go back." Lena looked up at him, her heart pounding. "I have nothing to do with this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would they care about me?" Karim's expression darkened. "Because you're my daughter." The words hung between them, final and unshakable. Lena's breath hitched. She had spent her whole life wondering about her father. And now, here he was. A billionaire, powerful, dangerous, and the reason her life had been a secret. She shook her head. "No, I—" A sudden noise made them both freeze. A phone buzzing. Karim pulled his from his pocket, glancing at the screen. His face darkened. Then, he turned the phone toward her. Her stomach dropped. It was a live security feed of her apartment. The front door had been forced open, and inside 2 men were searching through her things. Lena's breath came in short gasps. They... They found you, Karim said, voice deadly calm. She took a shaky step back, but Karim caught her wrist. His grip was warm, steady. You're staying here now, he said. They won't touch you. Tears burned in her eyes. Her whole life had just shattered, and in its place, only one truth remained. Lena Amari was no longer just a waitress. She was Karim Al-Fayed's daughter, and someone wanted her dead. Lena's hands trembled as she stared at the screen. They had found her. She looked up at Karim, fear tightening her chest. "What do we do?" she whispered. Karim didn't hesitate. "We end this." His voice was steel, his eyes filled with something dark. Vengeance. Lena swallowed hard. For the first time, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't running anymore. She was his daughter, and that meant she was ready to fight.